Once upon a time, in the damp, misty hills of a kingdom that no one remembers anymore. Not because it was small or unimportant, but simply because most people had more exciting things to think about. There stood a castle. Not the kind of grand, shiny castle you see on tourist brochures or in fantasy films with glowing swords and dragons, but a real, working medieval castle. Stone, moss, creaking wooden doors, drafty halls, and a rather persistent smell of damp straw. It was called Elderkeep. Elderkeep was cold in the winter, slightly less cold in the summer, and home to about 200 people. Not that most of them were ever noticed by anyone outside the walls. Inside, things moved slowly. No one rushed. Not because they were lazy, but because hurrying meant sweating, and sweating meant washing. And washing was a serious ordeal involving buckets, scolding, and a surprising amount of yelling. At the center of it all sat the king. But let's not start with him. Not yet. You see, most of the castle, the cooks, the maids, the stable boys, the night watch, the people who worked from sunrise to sundown just to keep things from falling apart, had very little to do with the king. In fact, if you were lucky, you might live your whole life inside the castle without speaking to him once. You'd know when he was awake, of course. His guards would stomp louder, his greyhounds would bark more, and someone in the kitchen would start crying because the king had requested roast swan again, and there hadn't been a swan in weeks. But still, life in the castle wasn't about the king. It was about the rest of them, the ones in the background, the ones with calloused hands and stories that never made it into the fancy scrolls. There was Marta, the scullery maid, who had been working in the castle since she was 8. Her hands were always red from scrubbing pots in water that was either too cold or boiling. She knew everyone's secrets, not because she was nosy, but because when people think you're too tired to care, they speak freely around you. Then there was Ralph, the night watchman. He had once been a soldier, or so he said, but no one had ever seen him lift anything heavier than a lantern. Still, he had a deep voice and a habit of squinting dramatically at shadows, which gave the impression of vigilance. He liked to walk the walls at night humming to himself and muttering about the old days, though no one was entirely sure what those days were or if they'd actually happened. There was also Ansel, the castle scribe, a thin, twitchy man who smelled faintly of ink and panic. He was responsible for writing letters, copying laws, and pretending he knew Latin better than he did. He had a desk in a corner of the library, which wasn't really a library but more of a cold room with 3 shelves of books, half of which were either blank or in a language no one could read. And of course, there was the cook. Her name was Bess. Just Bess. Everyone was afraid of her, even the rats. She ran the kitchens like a war camp. If a pot boiled over, she'd swear it was personal. If someone dropped a spoon, they'd best hope the king requested a fast dinner, because Bess wouldn't forget. She was short, wide, and moved faster than seemed physically possible. If you wanted to survive the day, you learned not to cross her. These were the people who made the castle function. They were the real backbone of Elderkeep. The king? He mostly sat, on a throne, on a horse, at feasts. He had opinions, of course. He liked things grand. He liked velvet and trumpets and meat with gold flakes on it. He didn't like noise during naps or the color yellow, for reasons he never explained. His name was King Aldrich. Not particularly cruel, just inconvenient. Now, as stories go, this one won't be about great battles or magical quests. It's about what happened one ordinary week in Elderkeep. Though by the end, even the stable boys were whispering that something wasn't quite right. It began on a Monday, or what passed for Monday in Elderkeep, since most of the people couldn't read calendars and just called it the day after the day we had gruel. The morning began as they often did. A bell rang, a rooster crowed, and someone in the tower dropped something heavy onto someone below. The usual. Marta was already up, dragging a mop across the stone floors and muttering under her breath about the straw getting everywhere again. She didn't mind the cold. It was the noise that got to her. Always the sound of something dripping, echoing down the halls like a lazy ghost trying to find a punchline. Ralph, on the other hand, had just finished his watch. He took his time climbing down the steps from the wall. Not because he was tired, but because there was a part of the stair that wobbled just a little, and he liked the thrill of pretending it might finally give way. Bess, as always, had started cooking hours before anyone else. She'd been awake since before dawn, throwing onions into a pot and shouting at a boy who'd sneezed near the bread. She was preparing breakfast for the king, which today would involve eggs laid only by hens fed with barley soaked in ale, or so the king had demanded in a scroll sealed with wax that smelled oddly like lavender. And in the library, Ansel sat at his desk, biting his nails and wondering if the stain on his sleeve was ink or blood. He was supposed to write out a decree about taxes, but the numbers didn't make sense, and he suspected the royal accountant might be hiding something. Not that he would say so aloud. Ansel liked his head where it was. Everything seemed as it always was, until a rider appeared at the gate. No one knew his name. He was cloaked in dark wool, his horse foam-flecked from a long ride, and his eyes hidden beneath a hood. He carried a message, sealed in wax as black as coal. The guards hesitated. Black wax was rare, and never meant anything cheerful. The king read the message behind closed doors. No one saw his face, but afterward, he summoned the castle steward and whispered something. Then he summoned the kitchen, then the blacksmith, then the scribe, and finally, Marta. Yes, Marta. That was the first strange thing. Marta was summoned to the king's chamber, not to clean, but to speak. She stood there, mop still in hand, blinking at the velvet curtains and the fire crackling in a hearth large enough to fit a cow. The king looked down at her and said only one thing. Do you believe in ghosts? She didn't know how to answer. She opened her mouth, closed it, then shrugged. I believe in leaks, your grace. They make noise. They vanish. Sometimes they smell. The king nodded slowly, as if that made perfect sense. From that moment, life in Elderkeep began to shift. Doors that had always been stuck swung open. Hallways that had been closed off for repairs no one remembered starting, were reopened. There was talk of something buried beneath the western wing, of a door no one remembered building. At night, Ralph stopped humming. He walked faster on his rounds and avoided looking into the windows. Bess started locking the pantry. Ansel wrote with a candle by his side and a dagger in his desk drawer. Not that he knew how to use it. And Marta? She began to hear things in the walls. Not rats. Not wind. Whispers. They were low, half-formed, like someone remembering a story they weren't supposed to tell. The castle, old and cold and forgotten by most of the world, was remembering something. And Marta, scullery maid and secret keeper, was right in the middle of it. But what exactly had the king been told in that black sealed letter? What had been hidden beneath Elderkeep's heavy stones and long, sleepy history? And why had he chosen Marta, just Marta, to help him uncover it? Those answers would come later. For now, Elderkeep was waking up, and none of its people, not the king, not the cook, not the scribe, not the guards, were quite ready for what would happen next. The thing about Elderkeep was that it had always felt old, not just in the way that stones grow moss or roofs sag, but in the deeper, heavier way. Like time itself had settled in the walls. Like every whisper, every footstep, every little secret spoken in the dark had been absorbed into the mortar and wood. People came and went. Kings were crowned and buried. Fires were lit and forgotten. But the castle stayed, watching, listening. After the king summoned Marta, word spread like it always did. Not openly, but through that odd rhythm of castle life where even the walls seemed to pass along a message. By the time Marta returned to the scullery, still clutching her mop like a shield, every servant had already stopped what they were doing just long enough to glance her way. No one asked her anything. They never did. But they watched. She didn't tell anyone what he said. Not even Bess, who stormed over with her sleeves rolled up and a voice that usually meant someone had forgotten to peel onions properly. Bess didn't scold her, though. She just stared hard, then gave her a piece of bread and walked away. That night, Marta didn't sleep. She lay on her straw-stuffed mat under a threadbare blanket, eyes open in the dark, listening. There was again that faint, brushing sound like fabric dragging along stone, followed by the whispering. Too quiet to make out words. Not frightening. Not yet, but enough to keep her eyes wide and her thoughts turning. In the upper tower, the king was pacing. King Aldrich wasn't used to pacing. He usually sat on thick cushions or leaned on carved banisters while other people did the worrying for him. But the letter had shaken him. It had come from the house of Sarn, an old family from the far northern hills. A family that, for generations, had sent warnings instead of greetings. The seal, black wax, pressed with the sigil of a stag pierced by a spear, meant only one thing. Something was coming. Something forgotten. Something buried. He didn't trust most of his court. They were too eager, too polished, too loud. So he called Marta. Because Marta didn't gossip. She didn't ask questions. She simply saw what others missed. Meanwhile, Ansel the scribe was having a bad week. His ink had frozen in the bottle on 2 mornings in a row, and he developed a nervous twitch in his left eye. He kept noticing odd details in the records. Mentions of servants who had no birth records, maps with faded markings near the western wing, and a peculiar entry dated 137 years ago that simply read, "Do not open the door. Burn the keys." He'd read it 10 times, each time squinting harder. No context. No follow-up. Just that one line. When he asked the steward about it, the man scratched his beard and muttered something about old fears and clerical nonsense. But Ansel noticed he locked the record room afterward and started carrying the keys on a cord around his neck. Even Ralph had started to feel something was off. The night watch was usually dull. Cats chasing mice. Wind tapping on shutters. Sometimes he'd pass the guards on the inner wall half asleep, and he'd clap loudly just to see them jump. But now the quiet felt wrong. It wasn't peaceful. It was listening. The western wing of the castle had been closed for years. First it was structural damage, then rats, then a rumor of mold. But the truth was, no one really remembered why it had been sealed. There were iron gates, thick chains, and a door that looked far newer than anything around it, as if someone had built it after the rest of the castle had already aged. That's where the king had gone late that night. Only 2 guards accompanied him. No fanfare. No torch procession. He stood before the western door, staring at the metal lock that hadn't been turned in at least 3 kings' reigns. His breath curled in the cold air. "What's behind it?" one guard asked quietly. The king didn't answer. He held the black sealed letter in his gloved hand and ran his thumb across the rough edge. "Nothing," he said finally. "And everything." Then he left. No one tried to open the door. Not yet. The next day, Marta was given a new task. Unusual, but not unpleasant. She was told to begin cleaning the old storage rooms near the west wing, the ones no one used anymore. She took her mop and bucket and went without complaint, though she did wonder why the king himself had made the request. The rooms were filled with dust and silence. Old crates, rotted cloth, cobwebs that clung to her sleeves. But she worked steadily, humming under her breath, not because she wasn't nervous, but because silence made her think too much. In one of the rooms, she found a door that wasn't on the map. A wooden one, half buried behind crates. It wasn't locked, just stuck from age. She left it alone for now. That same afternoon, Ansel had a visitor. A boy, no older than 12, with hair too long for a servant and boots too clean for a stable hand. "I'm looking for records," the boy said. "Family lines. History." Ansel frowned. "You work here?" "I will," the boy replied with a small smile. He was gone before Ansel could ask another question. That night, Bess burned 3 loaves of bread. She never burned bread. She said nothing about it, just threw the loaves into the fire and refused to bake anything sweet until further notice. By the end of the week, something strange had happened. Not frightening, not dramatic, just strange. The air felt heavier in certain parts of the castle. Servants walked faster, even when there was no rush. People avoided the west wing completely, even those who didn't know about the king's visit. Someone reported seeing a figure standing on the western parapet just before dawn, but when the guards checked, there was no one there. Just a small pile of feathers and a single coin, so worn down the markings had faded away. Then came the dreams. Marta had one first. She saw herself standing in front of the hidden wooden door, the one she hadn't opened. In the dream, the door was warm to the touch. Something on the other side breathed. Not words, just the sound of something alive and waiting. Ralph had a different dream. He was walking the ramparts, like always, but the stars were gone and the sky was red. The castle was empty. Every door was open. Ansel didn't sleep at all. He sat at his desk, candles melting low, scribbling notes on parchment that he later burned. He found a page in an old ledger, one with handwriting that didn't match any known scribe, and read it aloud by mistake. Afterward, the flames in his hearth turned blue for a moment. And the king? He called no more meetings. He stopped appearing at feasts. He sent orders through a single page who wore a dark robe and never spoke. People said the king was studying something, or praying, or hiding. Marta kept cleaning. Every day, she passed the wooden door. And every day, she paused. Her fingers itched to pull it open. She didn't know why. The castle wasn't just old. It was layered. Secrets built on secrets. And now, those layers were shifting. One night, a storm rolled in, thunder echoing across the hills, rain hammering against the walls. In the courtyard, lightning struck the old well. The next morning, a rope appeared, dangling from the side. No one had tied it. No one claimed it. That day, Marta opened the door. Not because someone told her. Not because she was curious. But because she felt it was time. Inside was a narrow passage, low-ceilinged and damp. She stepped inside, lantern in hand, and followed it. She didn't go far. Just a few paces. Just far enough to see the carving on the wall. A symbol she didn't recognize. A crown upside down, wrapped in thorns. She turned and walked out, closing the door behind her. She didn't speak of it, not even when the king sent for her again. He asked her what she saw. Nothing, she said, and he nodded, as if that was the right answer. Outside, the people of the kingdom went on with their lives. They didn't know that Elderkeep was stirring, that old rooms were waking, that dreams were crossing into daylight. But inside the castle, the silence had changed, and it wasn't going back. The day after Marta opened the door, the castle halls were colder than usual. Not just from the wind or weather, though the wind was sharp and the skies gray, but from something else. Something harder to name. The fire in the great hall burned like always, but the heat didn't seem to carry beyond the hearth. Servants lingered less in the corridors. Even Bess, who was usually full of complaints and instructions, said little. She stirred the soup slower, her eyes on the shadows in the corners. The king did not appear again that day. Not for breakfast, nor for council. Only the robed page passed silently through the halls, delivering instructions on folded parchment sealed in soft green wax this time. It was always the same writing, clean, careful, not quite familiar. Ansel received one of the notes. It asked him to find and translate a passage from an old volume in the record room. The one with the cracked spine and silver corners, kept on the highest shelf where no one ever reached. The book had no title. He'd seen it before, but never opened it. When he ran his fingers along the edge, a sliver of silver flaked off. The pages inside were stiff and dry, and the ink smelled strange. He translated 3 lines before he stopped. They read, "Before the walls, there were stones. Before the stones, there were names. When the names are spoken, the stones remember." He didn't know what it meant. He copied it down, as requested, and burned the rest of the page in the fireplace, just in case. Marta, meanwhile, found herself distracted. Her hands still scrubbed, still carried water, still helped Bess in the kitchens when short on staff, but her mind kept returning to the passage behind that door. It was narrow and short and stale with air that hadn't moved in years, but it hadn't frightened her. Not really. It had felt expected, as though someone had known she would come. And that carving, the upside-down crown wrapped in thorns. She was sure she'd seen it before, somewhere in the castle. Maybe not directly. Maybe in the faded fabric of an old tapestry, or scratched into the back of a storage door, or in the half-remembered shape of a dream. But it was familiar, and she didn't like that. She wanted to ask someone about it. But who could she trust? Bess would think she was losing sleep again. Ralph would make a joke, squint at the carving, and then pretend it was a dragon or something worse. Ansel, he was too close to the king, too deep in scrolls and candlelight to hear things properly. So Marta kept it to herself. Still, she began paying attention. To corners, to echoes, to how some rooms seemed colder than others, even when fires burned steady. One afternoon, she passed by the West Wing again and saw something that stopped her. A boy, no older than 10 or 11, standing at the far end of the corridor. Not moving, just watching. He wore no servant's badge, no family crest. Just plain clothes, too clean for a castle child. She blinked, and he was gone. She told herself it was nothing. A trick of light. Maybe a page running errands. But that night, she dreamed of the same corridor. Only this time, the boy walked toward her. Slowly. His eyes were strange, not cruel, not kind, just too still. And he whispered her name once before the dream ended. Elsewhere in the castle, Ralph was struggling to sleep, which was ironic, given his job was watching while others slept. But something about the night shifts had changed. The shadows moved differently now. The stars didn't always look the same from the tower. He'd always taken comfort in the rhythm, the same route, the same sounds. But now, a silence pressed in from the western side of the walls, a silence thick enough to notice. And then there were the crows. They came at dusk, dozens of them. They perched along the high battlements and watched the courtyard, unmoving. No cause, no fluttering, just stillness. No one knew where they came from or why they stayed. The cook's assistant tried to scare them off with a broom, and later, he slipped in the cellar and cracked a tooth. Bess didn't believe in omens, but she left the birds alone after that. The next day, another sealed message arrived from the king, this time addressed to Marta. It was short, 2 sentences. Clean the chapel in the lower cloister. Take no one with you. Do not speak of it. She went without question. She didn't like the lower cloister. It was damp, the stairs uneven, the air heavy, but she'd been there before. The chapel was always empty, and used since the last priest had passed away 3 winters ago. No one had taken his place. The villagers had begun walking to the abbey down the road instead. Easier that way. But when Marta entered the small stone chapel, something felt different. It wasn't the dust or the silence or the long-forgotten smell of incense. It was the altar. The stones behind it were cracked. And in one of those cracks, she found something lodged. A small pendant, shaped like the carving in the tunnel. The upside-down crown with thorns. She picked it up, heart thudding, and for a moment, the air around her grew still. Thick, like a storm waiting to break. She left the chapel quickly and said nothing. She hid the pendant in her apron pocket and walked straight back to the scullery, where she scrubbed pots until her fingers wrinkled. That evening, she saw the boy again. This time in the kitchen garden, standing by the herbs. He didn't speak. He didn't move. And when she blinked, he was gone again. In his quarters, Ansel finally found something useful or dangerous. It was hard to tell which. He traced the thorn crown symbol to a forgotten noble house, House Corvin, which had vanished from all records nearly 2 centuries ago. No known deaths. No final entries. Just vanished. The only note left behind had been scribbled in a different scribe's hand and read, "Buried, not broken. Bound, not dead." He felt a chill run down his neck. The next morning, the castle steward was found unconscious near the west gate. No wounds. No sign of struggle. Just lying there, eyes open but unfocused. Breathing but barely. He never spoke again. Whispers spread quickly, as they always do. Some said he saw something. Others that he'd tried to open the sealed door. Bess said nothing, but she made a habit of keeping a blade tucked in her boot after that. The king, they said, was preparing something. Planning. Watching. He hadn't spoken directly to anyone in days, but his page delivered more notes. Ansel received a second message. "Bring me the names." That was all. No further instruction. He didn't know what names. Living ones? Dead ones? He began compiling every servant list he could find, cross-checking names with burial records, family trees, and birth ledgers. And that's when he found something strange. Marta's name appeared in the ledgers twice. Once as herself, 26 years old, born in a village by the Eastern River. And once again, 127 years earlier, listed as a child servant at Elder Keep. Same name, same village. He rubbed his eyes. Read it again. Same name, same age. No descendants listed. Just vanished. He didn't say anything. Not yet. He wasn't sure what it meant. That night, the castle trembled. Just once. A low, quiet shake like a giant sighing beneath the stone. No damage. No falling bricks. But everyone felt it. Even horses in the stables reared and kicked. A lantern in the chapel fell and shattered. And somewhere in the west wing, a door creaked open, just a little. Marta didn't sleep. She held the pendant in her hand under the blanket and stared at the ceiling, waiting for the whispering to start again. This time it did, but it was closer, clearer. A voice, not cruel, not kind, just waiting. Do you remember Marta? She did not, but she was starting to wonder if she had forgotten something important. Something not just from this life, but from whatever came before. The castle was waking, and it was calling her. By the 4th week of autumn, Elderkeep no longer felt like the same castle. It looked the same, sure. The stones hadn't moved. The towers still stood. The great hall still echoed with footsteps and the low hum of daily chores. But the feeling had changed. Everything felt thinner, stretched tight, like a skin pulled over something beneath. People still worked. People still slept, but they did both less easily. And there were fewer of them, now. No one said much when the steward was sent away. He'd been in a kind of waking sleep since the fall by the west gate, his body still, his eyes half open, but his mind nowhere. The healers had tried everything. Herbs, prayers, even one of the old chants kept for emergencies. Nothing helped. Eventually, they took him down to the village to be cared for by the monks. But no one expected him to speak again. Marta stood at the kitchen hearth the morning he left, holding a bowl of warm oats she'd forgotten to eat. Bess passed by and looked at her. Dream again? She asked. Marta nodded. She hadn't told Bess anything in full. Only enough that Bess had stopped asking questions and started staying closer. They're getting louder, Marta said. Dreams. No, the voices. Bess went quiet. Then, without a word, she ladled soup into a bowl and pushed it into Marta's hands. Eat first, she muttered. Then talk about ghosts. Marta ate. Slowly. The pendant was still in her apron pocket, the thorned crown cold and heavy. The king hadn't been seen for almost 10 days, not in the flesh. His page still appeared with messages, always silent, always walking the same path from the tower to the library and back. Some said the king had taken ill. Others said he was doing something older, darker, and quieter than illness. Ansel believed both might be true. He hadn't slept properly in days, poring over birth records, land deeds, journals written in strange ink. The more he read, the more he found that didn't line up. Names repeating across centuries. Villages that vanished. A line in a diary that read, "If you stay long enough, the stones remember you, whether you want them to or not." And the crown symbol, upside down, thorn-wrapped, was everywhere now. He'd found it scratched into the bottom of a trunk in the attic, stamped into a coin buried under a floorboard. He'd even found a child's drawing, rough charcoal on parchment, of a figure with that crown around its neck, not its head. The figure had no face. He didn't know what it meant, only that it meant something. Ralph had stopped laughing at the crows. They hadn't left. They didn't move much. They stayed on the battlements, silent and still, watching. Every morning, someone would count them. The number never changed. 33. Always 33. One for each torch sconce in the old western corridor. The door to the west wing was still chained, but the air near it smelled different now. Older. Ralph noticed his breath fogged there even when it was warm elsewhere. He tried lighting a lantern near it. The flame went out without wind. He didn't mention it. He just lit the lantern again and moved on. Down in the lower cloister, the chapel had begun to change too. Marta returned a few days after her first visit, this time without a message. Something had pulled her there, quietly, without words. The pendant in her apron seemed to buzz with warmth. Inside, she found the air less stale than before. The altar had been swept clean, though she hadn't done it. And there were boot prints in the dust. Small ones, child-sized. She followed them around the side of the altar, where they vanished into the stone. That night, she dreamed again. The boy stood at the end of the tunnel she'd once entered, the one behind the wooden door in the storage room. He was whispering something she couldn't hear, his voice muffled by distance and dust. But she understood one word. Return. She woke with the taste of earth in her mouth. Meanwhile, a different trouble stirred in the village below. Father Lorne, the aging monk who kept the abbey records, arrived at the castle gates one rainy evening, pale and out of breath. He claimed something was wrong with the well at the old end of the village, the one the castle had long since stopped using. "It's not water," he told the gatekeepers. "It's something else. Something dark, moving, watching." No one let him in that night. But the next morning, a group of stable hands found their horses restless and sweating. One stall door had been clawed from the inside. By now, Bess had stopped pretending nothing was wrong. She kept Marta close, made sure they worked in pairs when cleaning the upper chambers, always carried something sharp, refused to go near the western hall. And when Marta finally showed her the pendant, Bess stared at it for a long time, then made a low sound in her throat and wrapped it in a cloth. "Old blood," she whispered. "That thing's got old blood in it." Marta nodded. "I think it belonged to someone from the castle. A long time ago." Bess didn't ask how she knew. In the king's tower, the page stood alone one morning, unmoving by the window. A passing servant said he heard him whisper something under his breath. Not a prayer. A name. Marta's. The tension was building, and not quietly. The weather changed too fast. The wind came from the wrong direction. Time felt strange. Hours felt like days, and nights passed in what felt like minutes. And the boy appeared more often. In the garden. In reflections. In dreams. Ansel saw him once in the record room, standing beside the stack of birth ledgers, pointing to an open page. When Ansel looked again, he was gone, but the page remained open. It showed Marta's name. Twice. That same day, Ralph found something on the outer wall during patrol. A piece of cloth, old and tattered, caught in a loose stone. Not unusual, except for the symbol sewn into the corner. The crown. The thorns. He brought it to Ansel, who ran his fingers across the faded threads. "This symbol keeps showing up," Ralph said. "What is it?" Ansel didn't answer at first. Then, "It's from a house that doesn't exist anymore. Or isn't supposed to. Like ghosts." "No, not ghosts." "Then what?" "People the castle didn't forget, even when the world did." Ralph didn't like that answer. Neither did Bess when she overheard them. She spat on the hearth and muttered, "Stones shouldn't remember. That's what we're for. People remember, not places." But Elderkeep did remember, more than anyone realized. One morning, the chains on the western wing were found loose. Not broken, just undone, as if someone had keys, as if someone had unlocked them quietly. No one admitted to it. The guards said they heard nothing. The gate creaked just once in the early hours, then stilled again. But that was enough. The king's page brought no messages that day. That night, Marta walked the corridor again. The west wing door stood open, just a crack. She didn't enter. Not yet. But she could hear something from within. Not words. Just breathing. Deep and slow, like the walls themselves were alive. Ansel wrote down every sighting of the boy. Every strange symbol. Every dream. He mapped the castle from memory and marked where each incident happened. There was a pattern, slowly forming, circling inward, toward the west wing. At the center, the sealed chamber. The door with the iron handle no one touched. He didn't know what it was guarding, but he knew it wasn't guarding nothing. And in the tower, the king wrote a name on a piece of parchment, folded it, and tucked it into his robe. Then he closed his eyes and whispered something no one else heard. The castle listened. Outside, the crows began to move again. One by one, they took flight, not away but inward, toward the western tower, toward the courtyard, toward whatever waited behind the doors no one opened. The castle was remembering, and soon, it would not let them forget. By the time the frost settled on the windowsills and the firewood began to burn faster than it was chopped, Elderkeep had grown quiet in a new way. Not from calm or peace, but from watching. The stone walls, the old floors, the spaces between footsteps, it all felt like it was listening, waiting. Even the wind seemed to hush near certain corners, like it didn't want to interrupt whatever was coming. Marta had stopped asking questions out loud. There was no need. Too many things had begun to speak on their own. That morning she had found the bread had risen too high and cracked in the shape of a crown. Bess refused to serve it, saying bread like that could make a man choke on his memory. Instead, she threw it into the fire and muttered something old under her breath. Ansel was sleeping in shorter stretches now. Each dream ended at the same image, the tunnel behind the chain door in the west wing. Only in the dream, it was always open. There were torches lit along the walls, burning without smoke. And at the end of the tunnel was a table with 3 chairs, only 2 ever filled. One with Marta, the other with a man whose face shifted every time Ansel tried to focus. Once, he woke with a scrap of parchment in his hand. He didn't remember writing it, but the words were in his own careful script. When the 3rd chair is filled, the king will fall. He folded it and kept it in the pocket of his robe. Ralph had taken to doing his patrols during the day, whenever he could manage. He said the torches didn't burn right at night anymore. The flame would lean toward the stones, then flicker even when the air was still. He started skipping the western corridor entirely. Not out of fear, he'd never admit that, but because the silence there made him forget things. Once, he forgot his own name for nearly a full minute. It came back, but not the same. It sounded strange in his mouth for the rest of the day. The castle's residents, from cook to knight, had noticed the changes. They didn't speak of it openly, but in small ways. Doors that were now left ajar, steps taken 2 at a time, rooms never entered alone. No one had seen the king since the frost began. The page continued his silent deliveries, though now he wore gloves, even indoors. He no longer looked people in the eye. When Marta passed him in the hallway, she saw something glinting at his neck, tucked beneath his collar. It was shaped like the pendant. The crown, the thorns. She said nothing. Down in the cellar, something had started scratching behind the wall near the wine casks. It wasn't rats. Ralph checked, and even the rats were avoiding that corner now. The noise came at regular intervals, for slow drags, then silence. It came only after dark. The cook's apprentice claimed he saw a woman standing there one night, her back to him, wearing a veil that moved like smoke. When he blinked, she was gone. He left the next morning and didn't return. That same night, Bess found a set of footprints leading from the well behind the kitchen to the chapel. Bare feet. Small. They ended at the altar. She wiped them away and lit a candle she'd never lit before. The one kept in the iron drawer for times of unnatural chill. Marta knew it was time to go back to the door. The one in the west wing. The one that had been chained. She didn't know what she expected to find there. Maybe a message. Maybe a name. Maybe just a boy. But she had the pendant in her pocket, the dreams in her head, and a quiet that had followed her for weeks now. It was no longer fear. It was inevitability. The door was still ajar. Not wide, just enough to let the cold out. She touched it lightly with her fingers, and the wood felt warm. She pushed it open. The passage was dark, but not silent. She could hear something deep within, stone breathing. Not a real breath, but a low rhythm, like the slow creak of ancient hinges that turned without hands. She stepped inside. The hallway was the same as before. Narrow, close, thick with the weight of old air, but something had shifted. The walls had carvings now. Faint, scratched, unfinished. Shapes that might have been letters once, or just marks left by fingernails and time. As she walked deeper, her steps fell softer. The stone seemed to muffle sound. And then, the boy appeared. He stood at the edge of the light, the same as always. Plain clothes, no expression, watching her with eyes that seemed older than his body. She stopped. "You opened it," he said. His voice was quieter than before, less distant. Marta nodded. "What is this place?" He looked past her, into the dark. "It's where the castle keeps what it remembers." She didn't know what that meant, but something inside her did. A part of her that had begun stirring in the dreams, the footsteps, the long glances at walls that shouldn't breathe. She took another step forward. Behind her, the passage closed. Not with a slam, not with a trap, just shut, like it was never open at all. In another part of the castle, Ansel dropped his ink pot. He'd been copying a section of an old land treaty when the writing on the page changed beneath his hand. The words rearranged themselves. The ink crawled across the parchment like it was alive. It spelled out one word: return. He ran down the hall, parchment still in hand, and went straight to Bess. "You said Marta dreamed of voices," he said, breathless. "She hears them," Bess said. "Not dreams anymore. She's gone into the passage." Bess dropped the ladle in her hand. "Then we've already waited too long." They gathered what they could: a lantern, some rope, an old symbol carved in a tin that Bess said once belonged to the abbey. Ralph joined them without question. The look in his eyes had changed. He hadn't laughed in days. They reached the western wing just before dusk. The door was sealed again. No lock, no chain, just stone, as if it had always been part of the wall. Ralph touched it, then pulled his hand back. It's warm. Ansel stared at it. We need her back. Bess shook her head. It's not about her anymore. If the castle's waking, it's because something remembered her. Why her? Ralph asked. Bess looked down at the lantern flame. Because she was here before, and the castle never forgets. Inside the tunnel, Marta followed the boy deeper. The path turned downward, gently at first, then more steeply. The air smelled like old rain and burnt herbs. The walls were lined with markings, circles, spirals, stars with uneven edges. At the end of the corridor was a chamber. Round, low-ceilinged, lit by a single hanging lamp with no flame. Just light. In the center of the chamber stood 3 chairs. Just like in Ansel's dream. One was empty. One had a crown carved into its back, thorns curling from the armrests. The other was the simplest, plain wooden, smooth. The boy pointed to the plain chair. That one was yours. Marta shook her head. I don't understand. You don't have to, he said. You just have to remember. And with that, the walls began to pulse. Not move, not shake, just pulse. Like a heartbeat buried in stone. Back in the main castle, the king's page appeared again, but not with a message. This time, he came to Ansel directly. He opened his mouth and, for the first time, spoke. He's not the king anymore. Ansel stared. What? The page blinked, and his expression softened into something almost human. He remembers who he was. That's worse. Bess pulled Ansel aside. We need to find the passage again. Ralph was already in the attic, searching for maps, diagrams, anything that showed what lay beneath the castle. He found one, buried in a crate of forgotten records. It was more sketch than plan, drawn in faded red ink. A circle beneath the west wing, with a single line leading down from it. No labels, no names, just 3 dots inside the circle. Ralph traced them with his finger. 3 chairs, he whispered. Bess reached for the map. Or 3 graves. Back underground, Marta sat in the plain chair. Nothing happened at first, but the air shifted, grew still. The boy walked behind her and placed a hand on the back of the chair. You came back, he said. I don't know why. You left something here. A long time ago. What? Your name. And then, the light changed. Not brighter, not dimmer, just older. It felt like the kind of light that shines through memories. And in that moment, Marta remembered a corridor she'd walked before. Not in this life. Another. A time when the castle was newly built, the stones fresh and sharp. She remembered laughing in the kitchens, walking arm in arm with a man whose face she couldn't place. She remembered standing at a window, watching crows gather on the battlements. She remembered being told to choose a side, and refusing. The boy leaned in. You didn't die. You just forgot. That's how the castle keeps you. She looked at him. What are you? I'm what's left when the story stops being told. And then the 3rd chair creaked. The throned one. No one sat in it. But it moved. The boy turned, his eyes wide for the first time. He's coming back. Above them, in the tower, the king stood at the window. He was not as young as he'd once been, nor as old as he should have been. His face was calm, but his hands shook. He wore no crown, just a plain ring with a missing stone. He opened his mouth and whispered the names of 3 people. Only one of them still lived, and the stone beneath the castle answered. The walls of Elderkeep groaned, not in collapse, but in awakening. A long-held breath let out after centuries. The memory was returning, and soon, no one would forget again. The night was not quiet anymore. Even the usual stillness of Elderkeep had been replaced by a low, humming kind of sound, barely there, like a thought in someone else's head. It was the sort of silence that made people murmur instead of speak, that made boots sound louder on the stone and breaths come shallower, even in rest. In the servants' quarters, the candles burned longer than usual. Some people found they couldn't blow theirs out at all. One boy wrapped his candle in a cloth and set it in a bucket of water, but the flame danced beneath the surface, stubborn and quiet. Outside, the wind shifted direction, then stopped altogether. The sky above Elderkeep held a strange, pearly gray just before the dawn. But the sun never came. Bess sat at Ansel's bedside, the book still clutched in his hands even while he slept. He hadn't moved in nearly 2 days, except for his lips. He whispered constantly. Always names. Always the same ones. Marta, Rowan, the king, and now a new one. He'd said it 3 times that morning. A name no one else in the castle had spoken aloud in generations. Elian. Bess didn't know the name, but it felt like someone had said it inside her ribs. She found herself mouthing it later while she washed her hands. When she blinked too long, she saw it etched into the stonework of the keep. When she looked away, it vanished. Something had begun, and it couldn't be undone. Down below, Marta stood beside the chair now. She no longer sat. She had not eaten, had not slept, but her eyes were sharper. Her fingers moved over the symbols in the arms of the ancient throne-like seat with care, not fear. Every mark now made sense, like a story she once knew by heart and only now remembered. The boy still said nothing unless she spoke first. He never moved closer, only waited. That part of him had not changed, but she'd noticed something new in his eyes, a flicker of knowing, and sadness. "What happens if someone else sits?" she asked him one morning, when the light overhead never changed, and she couldn't tell how long she'd been down there. "You know," he said, "I don't. You used to." That's not an answer. The boy's face twitched, almost a smile, almost pain. He turned toward the opposite wall where the stone was beginning to sweat. It hadn't done that before. Now the walls were slick, as though the castle itself had grown nervous. "There isn't a right choice," the boy said. "There's just the one you won't be able to unmake." That same hour, Ralph had found something strange in the West Tower. One of the guards had gone missing after reporting the statue had moved again. Ralph retraced the steps, hand on the hilt of the hammer he carried now instead of a blade. He found no sign of the guard, but the gargoyle wasn't where it had been. It was higher now, near the roofline, still watching, still tilted forward. A crow sat beside it, silent, not moving, not blinking. When Ralph stared at it too long, the bird turned its head upside down, then right again. He backed away, and as he did, the wind blew for the first time in a day, and it smelled like smoke from a fire that hadn't been lit yet. In the kitchens, the water turned thick. Not muddy, not bloodied, just thicker, like it had forgotten how to be water. The cook was the first to say it out loud. "The castle's dreaming." She didn't know why she said it, but once she had, everyone nearby stopped talking and looked at each other. That's what it felt like. Elderkeep was dreaming, and they were trapped inside it. Up in the tower, the king stood at his window again. No crown, no robe, just him in the gray light that hadn't changed for what felt like days. He had not written anything. He had not summoned anyone. And yet the guards remained at his door, waiting for instructions that would not come. Inside, the king looked older, not just tired, worn, as if the remembering had begun in him too. He kept whispering the same 3 names, again and again, sometimes in order, sometimes not. Marta, Rowan, Elian. Sometimes he added a 4th, and when he did, he wept. No one had seen the page either. The boy had not come back from the king's room. Ralph had tried to find him. He asked in the kitchens, in the stables, even in the bell tower where the boys sometimes liked to sit and scribble stories. No one had seen him, but the bell in that tower rang once that night. No wind, no rope, just one long, heavy note, like the castle itself had exhaled. Ralph found a drawing in the dust beneath it, just a few lines carved with a blade or nail. It was a picture of 3 chairs and a door behind them. One chair was empty. One was full. The third was missing a leg. He didn't know what it meant, but it made him nervous. In her sleep, Ansel spoke again. Before the first broke the circle, they had another name. Bess leaned closer. "Who did?" But he was silent again. The door that was not a door had begun to change. At first it was just heat. Then came the glow, a low, dull red that shimmered beneath the surface like something behind thick glass. Then came the sounds. A heartbeat. Steady. Slow. Getting louder. Marta hadn't looked at it directly in hours. She kept her eyes on the floor, on the symbols, on the boy. Anything but the glow. Because when she looked too long, she started to hear things in her own voice. Memories that weren't hers. Or maybe they were. She couldn't tell anymore. Once, she heard herself say, You promised you wouldn't leave. And another time, the king is only a mirror. The boy looked at her strangely then, as if waiting to see what she'd say next. But she said nothing, just turned away. The door continued to glow. In the gardens, Bess found a flower blooming that no one had planted. It was black, not brown or dark red, truly black, with a shimmer like oil on water. It smelled like firewood and salt. She picked it, and it bled. Not red, not anything bright, but a gray mist poured from the stem. It moved along her hand, curling around her wrist like a bracelet, then vanished. Her hand felt cold for hours. She said nothing about it to Ralph. The king's room remained silent. But on the morning of the fourth day, the one without sunrise, the page finally appeared. He came down from the tower barefoot, no cloak, eyes wide. He said only one sentence before collapsing in the great hall. She's already here. No one knew who he meant, but they all suspected the same thing. Elian. Marta heard the name in her dreams again, this time in her mother's voice. This time said gently like a bedtime name, a name from before names, the kind only used when you were safe, when you were loved, and she woke up crying. She hadn't meant to fall asleep, not in the chamber, not in the presence of the boy, who now stood just behind her instead of in front. Closer, watching. You remember more now, he said. I remember enough, she whispered. He tilted his head. Do you? She stood. The third chair was still empty. The shadow beside the other one still flickered and shifted, never quite settling into a single form. She took one step toward it. Don't, the boy said. She looked back. What happens if I don't sit? He swallowed. Then someone else will. Who? Someone who can't bear it. Her hand hovered above the crown. It wasn't solid anymore. It shimmered like liquid metal, and she thought she saw her reflection in it. Only older, wiser, or maybe just more tired. She pulled her hand back. The heartbeat in the wall sped up. Upstairs, the king finally left his chamber. No one stopped him. He walked through the great hall. The guards bowed. The page trailed behind him like a ghost. And when he reached the chapel, he didn't knock. He pushed the doors open and stepped into the candlelight. Every flame leaned toward him. He stood before the altar, stared down at the broken mirror, and smiled. They found the gate, he said. The page nodded. The king turned and whispered, Then I have only one task left. Below, the door began to hum. The stone of Elderkeep creaked. Just once, but loud, like something settling into place, or rising from a long, deep rest. And on the surface of the stone door, a new shape formed. A handprint. Marta stared at it. She didn't know what would happen if she touched it. But her hand rose anyway. The boy stepped forward. You won't be able to forget again. I don't want to forget, she said. Yes, you do, he said quietly. And that, more than anything else, made her pause. She turned to him. Why me? He blinked slowly. Because you're the only one who ever asked that. The handprint pulsed. Upstairs, Ralph and Bess stood at the tower steps, looking down into the keep. A red light was beginning to rise from below, like firelight, but colder. They didn't speak. They just waited. The king reached the door to the lower chambers. The boy didn't stop him. He opened the door and began to descend. Marta's hand hovered over the print, and just before she touched it, she heard another voice. Not the boy's, not the king's, not even her own, just a whisper. Old, sharp, kind and cruel all at once. It said one word. Remember. Marta's fingers hovered just a breath above the glowing handprint. The whisper, remember, still echoed somewhere behind her eyes. The sound of it had not faded like other thoughts. It lingered, warm and cold all at once, like the memory of something both loved and feared. The boy had gone quiet. She could still feel him behind her. Close. Too close. But he didn't speak again. Didn't warn her this time. As if he knew what she would choose before she did. Her palm pressed against the stone. It was not smooth. It was not cold. The texture was like flesh that had turned to marble. A surface too familiar to be comforting, but too strange to be real. The print fit her hand exactly, as though it had been made not long ago, but in anticipation of her return. And the wall exhaled. A long, low sound filled the chamber. Part wind, part voice, part something not quite sound at all. The stone beneath her hand shifted. Not with a jolt. Slowly. With the patience of something that had waited a very, very long time. Lines opened. Seams in the stone. A shape appeared that hadn't been there before. A doorway, narrow and high, arched like a cathedral window. Light spilled from behind it. Not red this time, but white, sharp-edged, and cold as snow under moonlight. The door was no longer a door. It was a passage. But to where, she didn't know. From the corner of her eye, she saw the king enter the chamber. He did not speak. He did not seem surprised. He simply walked past the flickering throne and stood beside her, looking through the doorway, hands clasped behind his back like a man surveying a long familiar field. "I told you," he said quietly, "there are places beneath the castle even I have not seen." She turned to him. "You've been here before." "Yes." "Then why return?" He looked at her now, and for the first time, she saw no distance in his eyes, no weight of rule or detachment of nobility. Just a man, older than she remembered, sadder, and certain. "Because something is waking," he said, "and it remembers us all." Bess and Ralph arrived just then. They stood at the edge of the chamber, unsure whether to cross the threshold of flickering light and shadow that now divided the old keep from this strange new passage. They could hear everything, and yet they felt apart from it, as though the room had pulled itself into two different times, one for the present and one for everything else. The boy stepped forward. His eyes were no longer passive. "She opened the gate," he said. "No," the king replied. She remembered how, and then, before anyone could ask what he meant, the white light behind the door shifted, flickered, pulsed, and bloomed outward into the chamber like a gust of wind that carried no sound, only weight. The air grew heavier, and the throne behind them, the one no one had dared sit in, crumbled. The stone shattered not with a bang, but with a breath. It collapsed inward, folding into itself until it was nothing but dust. And in its place stood not a seat, but a mirror. Tall, freestanding, like one from a dressing room in a noblewoman's quarters. But cracked, split right down the center. Marta stared into it, and the reflection she saw was not her own. It was her face, yes, but not as she was, as she might be, or had been. A version of her with silver in her hair and eyes like someone who had lived many lives. "She remembers too," the boy said, staring at the mirror. "Who?" Bess asked, her voice hoarse with fear. The boy turned to her. "The castle." And just then, the mirror blinked. Ralph pulled Bess back from it. But nothing came through. Nothing crossed. Only the image remained, growing sharper now, as though seeing them for the first time. The cracks in the glass glowed faintly. Runes along the fractures, shapes no one had spoken in centuries. Behind them, the white door opened further, and from within came a sound. A woman's laugh. Not cruel, not kind, just old. The king took a step forward toward the passage. But the boy blocked him now. "Not you," he said. The king frowned. "She called to me. She called to all of us. But you're not meant to answer. I'm the king." "No," the boy said softly. "You were." That silence again, the one no one wanted to break. The heartbeat behind the walls began to slow. And that's when Martin noticed something. The boy was changing. He stood taller now, his voice deeper, his eyes darker. Shadows pooled beneath him even where there was no light. His hands no longer fidgeted, no longer small. They were the hands of a man. "You were the last to sit," she whispered. He nodded. "And you stayed." It was the only way. The only way to what? To keep her asleep. The mirror pulsed again. The glass bent slightly, warped. The face inside had opened its mouth, but no sound came. Until suddenly, everyone in the chamber heard the same voice. "You let me dream too long." Ralph pulled his hammer from his belt. Bess reached instinctively for Marta. The king did not move. The boy closed his eyes. "She's waking now," he said. "Who is she?" Marta asked, though the question felt too small now. Too late. The boy looked toward the mirror, the one the castle was built to contain. Bess shook her head. "But that's not in the histories. There's no mention of her." The king sighed. "There wouldn't be." "Why not?" "Because forgetting her was the only way we could survive." The door behind them, the glowing passage, began to close. Not shutting, but pulling inward, as though being sucked back into itself. The stone around it cracked. One of the torches on the wall went out with a hiss, though no wind moved. Marta turned to the king. You knew this could happen. He nodded. And you said nothing. I hoped it never would. But it has. The boy stepped forward. And now she'll try to return. To where? To the world, he said. To the surface. To the place where names still hold meaning. Marta stared at the mirror again. Her reflection was gone. Only the face of the woman remained. She was beautiful and terrifying. Her eyes were ageless. Her mouth neither smiled nor frowned. But her presence filled the chamber like a shadow pressing on every breath. She's not a person, Bess whispered. No, the king said. She's a memory and a promise. The mirror cracked again, this time audibly. A jagged line split down the middle of the glass, and through it they could see not just a reflection, but a room beyond. Stone walls, a table, 3 chairs, but not the chamber they stood in. Another place, another time, and in one of the chairs sat the woman, waiting. She's in both places at once, Marta said, her voice shaking. She's trying to choose, the boy said. Choose what? Whether to return. The king shook his head. Or whether to take us with her. Outside the chamber, the wind howled. Loud this time. Real. The sky above the castle had darkened. Clouds rolled in like a tidal wave. And the bells in the tower began to ring on their own. Slow. One after another. Not in panic. Not in warning. In rhythm. Like a countdown. The boy turned to Marta. There's still time, he said. One person can go through. Only one. To do what? To seal her away again. But it must be someone who remembers. The king stepped forward. Then it must be me. But the boy shook his head. You remembered too late. Marta looked at Bess. Then at Ralph. And then at the mirror again. The woman's eyes turned toward her. And this time she smiled. Not wide. Not cruel. Just knowing. Marta had never known stillness to feel so loud. The mirror no longer simply reflected. It glowed. The silvered glass pulsed gently, like the breath of something alive. Not fast, not urgent, but steady, patient, and underneath it all, the sense of watching, that unmistakable feeling that someone or something saw her clearly now and had been waiting for her to notice. The woman inside the glass hadn't moved. And yet, everything about the chamber felt different since that smile had appeared. That slight curve of the lips, as if she knew the ending already and was letting them fumble their way to it. Bess was the first to step back. Her foot brushed against a small stone that had fallen from the ceiling earlier. She didn't speak. None of them did. But her eyes were wide, and her breath trembled against the silence. Ralph shifted beside her, his calloused fingers tightening around the grip of his hammer. He didn't lift it. Not yet. But he held it like a tether to something real. Something simple. Something solid, unlike whatever was happening here. The king looked old now. He had aged visibly in the last few minutes. His shoulders drooped slightly. His skin seemed paler. Or maybe it was the light. That strange, glowing whiteness from the mirror, which cast no shadows and made everything look just slightly wrong. The boy, who wasn't a boy anymore, not really, stood between Marta and the passage that had begun to close behind them. The light from it had dimmed, and the stones were folding back into place, slowly, reluctantly. He watched the mirror, not blinking. She's choosing, he said again. Still. Choosing what? Marta asked softly, though she already sensed the answer wouldn't make sense in the way she wanted it to. To awaken as herself, or to return in pieces. I don't understand. She could come back slowly. Through people. Through memory. That's how she stayed asleep for so long. Fragments buried in stories. But now she might want to come all at once. Marta's eyes flicked to the mirror. That's what she's choosing? How to return? He nodded. And who will carry her? Carry her in mind, in body, in voice. No, Bess said suddenly, breaking the silence. Her voice was low and steady, but there was a tightness to it that hadn't been there before. No, I don't care how old this place is, or what she is, or what's behind that mirror. We don't carry her anywhere. We lock it up. We leave and we forget. Again, Marta turned slowly. But we can't forget. Not this time. Bess's eyes were sharp. Why not? Because she's remembering us. The mirror pulsed again, just once, and the smile on the woman's face faded. Her mouth opened. No sound came, but each of them heard something different. Marta heard her own name, whispered not by the woman, but by someone she couldn't see. Someone lost. Ralph heard the creak of a forge, and his father's voice calling him home. Bess heard the sea, and the crash of waves in the cove where her brother drowned. The king heard nothing. And the boy's eyes filled with tears, but he didn't look away. She's trying, he said, barely above a whisper. Trying to pull through. Through what? He looked at Marta, and his voice cracked. Through you. A long breath passed through her lips. Her knees weakened slightly. Me? You remembered first. You touched the seal. You looked without looking away. Marta stepped back. No, but she already felt it. That quiet warmth behind her ribs. That soft hum beneath her skin. Like something humming inside her, out of tune with everything else. She can't come through me, she said quickly. I'm no one. No, the boy said. You were. The words chilled her more than she expected. The way he said them, as if her being no one was something that had already changed. The king took a step forward now. He moved between them, toward the mirror, and stared into it. What do you want? He asked, not to Marta, but to the woman. Her eyes shifted to him, and the chamber dimmed again. One torch flickered out, another, and then, all at once, the walls of the chamber changed. Not moved, changed. 1 second they were stone. The next there was something else. Something older, covered in carvings that hadn't been there a moment before. Symbols that looked familiar and wrong all at once. Spirals, eyes, trees with roots wrapped around circles. The ground beneath their feet trembled. Marta reached for the wall instinctively and touched the carvings. Warm, like skin. It's her, the boy whispered. She's waking through the stone. The king took another step toward the mirror. He raised his hand, not to touch it, but to offer something. His voice was hoarse now. Take me, he said. Not them. The woman blinked slowly, then turned her head just slightly. The mirror darkened. The room around them grew colder, and then the glass cracked again. This time, not a spidering line, a fracture, a long, deliberate vertical break that stretched from the top to the bottom. A sound echoed in the chamber, deep, hollow, and final. And something stepped through. It wasn't the woman. It was a shadow, not cast from a person or flame. It moved on its own, stretching out from the glass like smoke made solid. It crawled across the floor, slowly, reaching. Bess pulled Marta back. Ralph raised his hammer, but the boy didn't move. It's just a part of her, he said. That doesn't make it better, Ralph muttered. The king knelt now, as if offering himself fully, but the shadow ignored him. It slid past him, toward Marta. No, Bess said. Marta froze. The warmth inside her was now heat. Not burning, not yet, but building. She looked down, and her shadow, it was no longer her own. It moved differently, like something trying to catch up with her, to mimic her shape, but failing just slightly. She stepped back. The shadow followed. Not under her. Beside her. Stop, she said aloud. And it did. It froze. Marta looked into the mirror again. The woman was gone. Only the room beyond remained now. Empty. No table. No chairs. Just stone. But at the far end, a door. Wooden. Tall. Closed. The boy stepped beside her. That's where she is, he said. She just left. She's waiting. Testing. She wants to see if you'll follow. And if I do, then the last seal breaks. And if I don't, the boy looked sad. Then she'll wait for someone else. The chamber flickered again. The carvings on the walls began to shift, sliding across the surface like liquid. The ground trembled again, this time harder. From above, they could hear the bells ringing once more, faster now. Like a warning. She's not just coming back to the castle, Marta whispered. No, the boy replied. She's coming back through it. Outside, beyond the keep, the sky had turned completely. Not night. Not day. Just gray. Colorless. As if the world itself was forgetting how to be what it was. Marta turned to Bess. We need to stop her. Ow! Bess asked. I have to go through, she said, nodding toward the mirror. No, the king said. No one goes through. That's what she wants. But if I go willingly, she'll take more, the boy said. She always does. Marta shook her head. We can't leave it like this. If we close the mirror, if we walk away, someone else will find it. Someone weaker. The boy turned to her. Then go. But how do I stop her? He hesitated, then reached into his coat and pulled something from the inside pocket. It looked like a coin, but old, darkened with age, and covered in symbols that hurt the eye. This is a memory, he said. What? A real one. From when she first came. When the castle was new. When people still remembered why they built it. Marta took it. It was heavy. Much heavier than a coin. What do I do with it? When you see her, show it to her. Make her remember. She fears her true shape. And if she doesn't, then run. Marta nodded once, slowly, then turned back to the mirror. The fracture in the glass widened. The light within grew dimmer. The shadow beside her slid closer. And Marta stepped forward, through the mirror. The moment she crossed the glass, the air changed. Not colder, just wrong. It smelled like nothing. Like the absence of scent. Like stone that had never touched air. The floor beneath her feet was smooth, unlike the rough-hewn flagstones of the castle above. This was older, made before comfort mattered. The door at the end of the corridor waited, and somewhere behind it, footsteps. Slow, barefoot. One step, pause, another. Marta's fingers curled around the coin in her pocket. The door began to open. The door creaked open without anyone touching it. It swung inward slowly, with a groaning moan of hinges that had not moved in centuries. Marta didn't breathe. She stood still, her boots silent on the smooth floor, watching the dark space beyond the door stretch out like a tunnel. The air shifted, dry and thick, like the breath of the earth rising up through a mouth that it kept hidden. The scent reminded her of old stone cellars, of books left unread, of things better left forgotten. The hallway beyond the door was lined with tall pillars, but no light touched the tops. It felt impossible. How it could be so dark, and yet she could still see. But she could, as if her eyes had begun to adjust to something beyond vision. Her own heartbeat pulsed in her ears, louder than her footsteps. She had crossed into a place not meant for living people. She held the coin tightly in her pocket. It burned now, not with heat, but with pressure, like it wanted to be used, or feared being forgotten. She didn't take it out yet. Something inside her warned her to wait. At the end of the tunnel stood a figure. Not the woman from the mirror. Not a shadow. Not even someone she could name. It was tall. Taller than any human, with a shape that shimmered like a mirage. At moments it seemed robed, other moments clothed in armor, and in others still, entirely faceless and cloaked in smoke. Whatever it was waiting for her. Its hands, or what looked like hands, hung at its sides, still and empty. Marta stepped forward. The figure didn't move, but the tunnel did. The walls rippled, almost breathing. The pillars shifted slightly, and beneath her, the floor cracked. Just a hairline fracture, but it pulsed outward, spidering under her feet in every direction. "You came," the figure said, though its mouth didn't move. The voice came from all around her, soft and low and dry like wind moving through a hollow shell. "I want to understand," Marta said, "before you take anything more." The figure tilted its head. "I don't take. I return. This place, this castle, was built on my bones." "Then why the mirror? Why the seals?" "To contain the forgetting. Not me." Marta stepped closer. The floor cracked again. "You're lying. Only to those who need lies. But you," the figure paused, "you need the truth. That is more dangerous." "What are you?" The figure shifted again. For a moment, it had her face. For a moment more, it had Bess's. There was no one again. "I am what remains when a story outlives its teller." Marta swallowed hard. "You used to be someone. I was many. The first voices. The ones who remembered before memory had names. I was the mother of the hill, the child of the root, the voice that came up from beneath. They built this castle on my resting place. But I was not resting. I was listening. To what? To them. The people. Their feet. Their whispers. Their hunger. Their fear. That's how I grew." Marta's voice dropped. "You fed on them. I learned from them. Then why hide?" The figure grew taller, darker. Its voice tightened. "They buried me. Locked me beneath stories. Made me myth. They feared me because I knew them. All of them. I saw their true selves. and I remembered when they no longer could. Marta drew out the coin. It glowed faintly in the dimness. The figure's shape faltered. It shimmered, staggered. Where did you find that? It was given to me, she said. A memory. The figure hissed. Not with breath, but like wind over broken reeds. That should not exist. Marta held it out. But it does. She took a step forward, and the coin burned brighter. The figure stepped back. The walls trembled. You fear this, Marta said. I do not fear, it said, but its voice cracked. You do. Because this is the truth you can't rewrite. A memory before you twisted it. This coin holds what came before your story. And you can't change it. The figure lunged. But it didn't strike. It passed through her. The coldness was unbearable. Like falling into a frozen river while already asleep. Marta gasped, her vision flickering. But she clutched the coin tighter, and through the burning in her hand, she felt warmth radiate outward. Not fire. A heartbeat. Not hers. Something older. Something human. The chamber shook. The pillars cracked. From above, stone began to fall. The figure screamed. But it wasn't a scream of pain. It was fury. I will return, it howled. Even if not through you. Marta slammed the coin to the floor. It shattered. Not the coin. The room. The illusion. The figure. Everything. The world cracked open with a soundless blast, and she was falling. The figure's form burst into mist, pulled backward like smoke through a window, disappearing into the walls, into the earth, into the mirror behind her. Then, stillness and black. She opened her eyes in the courtyard of the castle. She was lying on the cold stone. The sun had returned. Pale, distant, but real. The bells had stopped. The mirror was gone. Ralph knelt beside her. Bess was gripping her hand. The king stood silently nearby. The boy was gone. What happened? Bess whispered. I gave her the memory, Marta said weakly. It broke the spell. She's gone. Ralph frowned. Forever. Marta hesitated. For now. The king turned his eyes toward the broken tower. There will be others, he said. Others who come. Who dig. Who whisper. We'll warn them, Bess said. We won't have to, Marta said. They'll feel it. And then, a scream. From the western wall. They all turned. A guard came running. There's a hole, he said. A hole where the chapel used to be. It just opened. Like something's burrowing up. Marta stood slowly. No, she whispered. Bess looked at her. What? She's not gone. She's splitting. Ralph's voice was rough. What do you mean? I forced her out of me. But not back to sleep. She's trying again. Somewhere else. They all stood in silence. Below them, the earth trembled. The wind picked up, carrying whispers. A final breath passed through the stone. And from the woods beyond the castle, a second mirror cracked open beneath the roots of a dying tree. It wasn't the kind of scream you forget. The kind of scream that carries across stone and wind, slipping through arrow slits and down the narrow, winding stairs. It was thin, not sharp like terror, but ragged, like someone who'd seen something their mind couldn't hold all at once, and now was slipping through them like water through fingers. The guard's face was white. He stood frozen just past the main gate, one hand gripping the side of the stone arch, as if the wall was the only thing keeping him upright. His eyes were locked on something past the chapel, something none of them could see from where they stood. Marta was the first to move. Her limbs still ached. Her breath hadn't quite evened out since stepping back through the mirror, before it vanished entirely, but she moved anyway. Her boots tapped against the stone, each step louder in her ears than it should have been. Behind her, Bess followed quickly, Ralph just behind, still gripping that hammer like a prayer. The king didn't speak. He walked with the rest, but slower. He was thinner somehow than he had been that morning. Or perhaps the air around him was simply different now, quieter, more hollow. Like the castle recognized him less with each hour. The guard pointed before they reached him. There, he said, where the chapel stood. They rounded the stone outbuilding, stepped past the broken cart that had been half-eaten by moss for decades, and then stopped. The chapel was gone. Not collapsed. Gone. The earth where it stood looked raw. The stone had cracked open in a rough, jagged circle, about 30 feet across. The edges of the earth were dry and pale, as though something had been seeping upward from beneath. In the center of the hole was a dip, not deep like a well, but shallow, shaped like a bowl. And at the center of that dip, another mirror, not standing like the one below the keep. This one lay flat, set flush into the ground, its surface dull as tarnished silver, with a hairline fracture running through the middle. Marta stepped toward it, slow and careful, as if it might vanish again if she moved too fast. The ground didn't feel right under her feet. It was too warm, too soft. She crouched beside the edge of the mirror. There was no frame this time, no border, just the glass, or what looked like glass, set into the earth like it had always been there. She reached out, but before her fingers could brush the surface, a voice behind her said, "Don't." She turned. It was the king. "Once may have been your choice," he said, "but twice might be hers." Marta straightened. "We need to know what's in there." "We already do," Bess said softly. "We've seen it, heard it, felt it. That mirror, this one, isn't another trap. It's a door. Or worse, it's a root." Ralph frowned. "A root?" Bess nodded. "The castle was built on her." She said it herself. This mirror might not be the only one. There could be more, like roots spreading from an old tree. She's not coming back through one place. She's coming back through all of them. The sky above was gray again. Not dark, just faded. The colors seemed thinner. The air didn't carry sound the same way it had that morning. A bird called in the distance, but the note died halfway across the field. "I saw a tree," Marta whispered, "when I was in that other place. Just for a second. Behind the door. I thought it was carved on the wall. But maybe it wasn't." The king turned slowly. "The tree of Holdfast." "What?" "There was a tree," he said. "In the records. One of the first images carved into the stones of the West Wing. Before the chapel. Before the keep was finished. It had no leaves. Its roots coiled around a circle, like a mirror. The masons thought it was just symbolic." "It wasn't," Marta said. "It's real." They stood in silence for a long moment, the wind moving slowly through the dry grass at their feet. Ralph looked down into the hole. "So what do we do?" Marta didn't answer. Neither did the king. Because the truth was, they didn't know. For the first time since this all began, there was no clear action, no path forward. Only the quiet realization that what they had stopped was only a piece of something much larger. The mirror hadn't been broken. It had moved. That night, the castle didn't sleep. The bells had been silenced by hand. 2 guards sent up to the tower to wedge the clappers with cloth and rope. But even without them, the air carried a constant tension. Doors creaked more than usual. Shadows didn't settle where they should. And more than one servant reported seeing something small and quick dart across the stone halls, just past the torchlight. Marta stayed in the old library. It was the only place she felt grounded. The coin she'd used was gone, shattered in the space behind the mirror. But she'd taken one of the books from the shelf, the same one the boy had touched when they first opened the way, and was paging through it slowly, trying to find a thread that still made sense. The language was old, but the symbols were older. Some of them she now recognized. The spiral, the eye, the broken crown. There were stories here, not written plainly, but pressed into the margins, drawn in faded inks, and scribed in hands that had clearly been unsure if writing them down was safe. Bess came in quietly. "I thought I'd find you here." Marta looked up. "Couldn't sleep," she said. "Didn't think you could." Bess sat across from her, reached across the table, and flipped one of the pages with a finger. "I used to think this place was dull," she said. "Stone, dust, cold stew." Marta smiled faintly. "It still is." Bess shook her head. "Not anymore. Not since the mirror." Marta sighed. "I keep thinking we ended it. Or paused it. But that second mirror, it wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning of her next try." Bess leaned back. "I think that's what she is," she said. "A beginning that never ends. Like a story that forgets how to finish itself." Outside, the wind picked up, and deep below the castle, in the oldest part of the foundation, far beneath the kitchens and the servant halls, a soft noise echoed through the stone. A thump, then another, rhythmic, like footsteps, or a heartbeat. In the days that followed, more holes opened. Not mirrors, just raw earth, near the stables, in the grain cellar, at the edge of the northern wall. They weren't deep, not yet, but they were spreading. And each time they appeared, the grass around them faded, the soil dried out, and the animals nearby grew quiet. The castle wasn't just haunted now. It was waking up, not from a dream, but from memory. The king left in the night. No word, no escort, just his absence. They found his crown on the altar of the ruined chapel. Inside it was a small scrap of parchment. 5 words. She remembers what we forgot. Marta stared at the note for a long time, then folded it once and tucked it into her sleeve. There was no point pretending the castle would go back to what it was. It had already changed. The people had changed. Something deep and old had been stirred, not just in the stone, but in the minds of everyone who lived here. Bess took over most of the daily duties. Ralph helped restore the damaged walkways. The mirror in the courtyard remained untouched. No one dared approach it anymore. And yet, one night, as the wind howled through the high towers, Marta stood by the battlements and watched a child walk through the grass below. A girl, barefoot, hair white as snow. She wasn't glowing, but the mirror did. Only for a moment. Just one soft pulse of light. Then stillness again. The girl disappeared into the fog, and Marta realized with a sick twist of dread. It wasn't over. The story hadn't ended. It had just been passed on. Not erased. Inherited. It had been 3 days since the last tremor. 3 quiet days. The longest stretch of stillness since the chapel vanished and the earth cracked open beside the well. No more holes had appeared. No new mirrors. No signs of the girl with white hair. It was like the castle had taken a breath and was holding it. But Marta didn't believe it was peace. Not really. She walked the halls every morning, just after sunrise, tracing the path along the battlements and down the inner courtyard before slipping into the old cellar by the servants' wing. She no longer checked the gates. The danger was never outside. It had always come from within. Bess met her that morning at the top of the watchtower. The view from there stretched clear over the western wall and down into the field where the orchard used to grow. The grass had started to return, slowly, in patches. There were still black scars in the earth where the holes had opened, but they hadn't deepened. "She's watching," Bess said without turning. "I can feel it." Marta didn't ask who she meant. They both knew. The presence, the memory, the woman, whatever she was, that had once been sealed behind the mirror. "She isn't trying to cross again," Marta said. "She's waiting for something." Bess nodded, her arms folded across her chest. "I've been thinking. That book in the library. Do you remember the last symbol we saw? The cracked circle?" "Yes. I think it's not a warning. It's a map." Marta blinked. "A map to where?" "Not to where," Bess said. "To when." It was such a strange idea at first that Marta didn't say anything. But then she remembered the way time felt inside that mirror room, the way the walls had pulsed, the way her heartbeat had gone out of sync with her steps, the candle that never melted, the dust that never moved. "You think it's still here?" Marta asked. "That place?" "I don't think it ever left." Ralph joined them later that morning. He carried a wrapped bundle, linen over rough wood. When he unwrapped it, Marta's breath caught. It was the broken shard from the courtyard mirror. Someone had pried it from the earth. She reached out, but stopped her hand before touching it. "It's cold," Ralph said, "even when I left it near the fire overnight. The edge doesn't dull either." "It's like ice," Bess whispered. "But older." Marta stared at the piece. A splinter of something that had once been a door. A piece of the tree's root, perhaps. She didn't know anymore what was real and what was simply remembered wrong. "We should bury it," Ralph said. "No," Marta said. "Not yet." Because she had a feeling that the castle wasn't waiting to be forgotten. It was waiting to be understood. That night, she went alone. Back to the old cellar. Back to the shelf where the mirror had been. There was no sign of the doorway now. Just smooth stone, old dust, and the faint scent of smoke. She sat with her back against the wall, the shard in her lap, and waited. It was late. Cold. And then, just past midnight, she heard it. A whisper. Not in words. Not even in sound, but in the air. A shift, like the wall beside her had exhaled, like the stone itself remembered. She stood up slowly, pressing the shard into the crack between 2 bricks. It fit snugly like it belonged there. The air hummed, and then, without any flash, without any sound, the wall softened. Like water, like light through fog. Marta stepped through. The space beyond was dimmer than she remembered. The room had changed. The high arches were gone, replaced by smooth curves of stone that glowed faintly with blue light. The ground was soft beneath her boots, not like dirt but something older, something alive. She turned slowly, trying to understand. There was no mirror, only space, a room that felt stretched, like time itself had thinned. And at the far end, a shape, the woman, still cloaked in white. But her face was clear now, pale, quiet, and sad. "You came back," she said. Her voice was gentler than before. Not hollow, just tired. Marta stepped forward. "I had to know." The woman nodded. "You asked what I am." "Yes. I'm always forgotten," she said. "I'm the part of the story that was buried." Marta frowned. "You were part of the castle?" "I was the castle," she said. "Or rather, the first keeper of it. When the foundation was still a hill, when the stone was still unshaped. I was the one who planted the tree." Marta's voice was soft. "The tree of holdfast. It was real," the woman said. "It was the anchor." The mirror came later, to hold what the roots could not. Marta's breath caught. "You weren't sealed away. You sealed yourself in." The woman nodded. "I thought it would hold. But memories slip, and people forget. They built over the roots. They paved over the pain. They thought they were building safety, but they were burying me." Marta didn't know what to say. The woman stepped closer. Her feet made no sound on the ground. Her eyes held Marta's gently. "Tell them," she said. "Tell them what lies beneath their feet is not dead. It is sleeping, and sleep is not silence." "I don't know if they'll believe me," Marta said. "They don't have to believe," she replied. "They only have to remember." The room faded, not with light, but with a feeling like waking from a long dream. And when Marta opened her eyes again, she was sitting in the cellar. The shard was cold at her lap. The wall was solid, but something in the stone had changed. It took weeks to rebuild. The holes were filled, one by one, with stones marked by the old symbols from the library. The mirror shard was placed at the base of the chapel ruins, buried beneath a ring of salt and thistle. Marta took over as steward after the king's disappearance. She didn't wear a crown. She didn't sit on a throne. She just walked the halls, asked questions, and listened. The castle quieted. The walls stopped groaning. The fog lifted from the upper towers. The bells rang true again. But Marta never stopped watching the earth, because the roots were still there, waiting, not to return, but to be remembered. Bess eventually left. She said she wanted to find the place where the tree had first grown, somewhere east, near the river valley. She promised to write if she found anything, but no letters ever came. Ralph stayed. He planted herbs near the courtyard and rebuilt the broken garden beds. He said he liked the soil now, said it felt honest. And every year, on the first frost, a ring of white mushrooms grew around the place where the second mirror had opened. They never spread, never rotted, just sat there quietly, like a reminder. Years passed, and still the castle stood. Visitors came, some curious about the mirror rumors, others simply seeking a place to rest. Most left with stories of strange dreams, flickering candles, or footsteps on stairs no one had climbed. But no one was harmed, and no mirrors reappeared. One boy, a cook's apprentice, once swore he saw a tree growing from the stone near the well. But when the others checked, it was gone. Only a single leaf remained, white, smooth, and cold. Marta grew older. She never married, never left the castle. Some said she was waiting for the king. Others thought she had gone mad. But those who lived within the keep knew the truth. She had become the castle's memory, the one who kept the stories, the one who listened, even when no one spoke. And on the night of her final walk, when the stars hung close and low, when the wind sang through the open chapel, Marta returned to the cellar one last time. The shard was gone. Only the faint outline of it remained, pressed into the stone like a thumbprint. She sat down in the same spot as before, closed her eyes, and smiled, because in the silence she heard it again. Not a voice, not a scream, just a hum, like roots settling deeper, like stone remembering water. It was the cold that made him notice, not the kind of cold that comes with the changing seasons, the crisp bite of October or the hush of winter, but something deeper, still, like breath held too long. It lingered in the corners of the hall near the old cellar steps, beneath the flagstones that never warmed, even in summer. Edric had only been a holdfast for 6 months. He wasn't a steward. Not yet. Just an apprentice to the steward's assistant, which mostly meant fetching parchment, dusting ledger shelves, and being polite to the cook's goose, who had claimed the western stairwell as her kingdom. But he watched. He listened. And he paid attention to things others didn't notice anymore. He'd grown up in the lowlands, where castles were stories told in firelight and ruins sat half-sunk in sheep fields. When he arrived to Holdfast, he expected drafty towers and creaking shutters, maybe a friendly ghost or two. What he didn't expect was how alive everything felt. The floors didn't just creak, they sighed. The walls didn't just echo, they responded. And sometimes, in the early morning when the fog curled through the main gate and the oil lamps flickered blue, the castle felt like it was listening. The steward, Mistress Anwen, never spoke of such things. She was practical, tall, silver-haired, and always carrying 2 sets of keys as if one might betray her. She kept careful track of rations and wrote long letters to lords who never visited. She never talked about Marta, but Edric found the name carved faintly into the bottom drawer of the records desk. Just 4 letters. Nothing else. But it made his hands go still when he traced them. Marta, he asked once. Mistress Anwen only replied, she kept this place standing longer than most would have. That's all you need to know. But it wasn't. He needed no more. It started on the 3rd morning of frost. Edric was repairing a broken window in the South Archive, an old record room no one used anymore, when he found the book. It wasn't shelved. It was hidden behind a loose panel of stone, tucked between a cracked ledger and a spindle with no thread. The binding was plain. No title. Just dark green, leather gone, soft with age. He opened it. The first page was blank. The second held 1 line, written in careful script. This is not a record. This is a warning. His heart knocked once against his ribs. He flipped the next page. There in small entries spaced days, or sometimes weeks, apart, was a journal. Marta's handwriting. Neat, thoughtful, sometimes shaky. It began with ordinary things. The Eastern bell chimes differently now. I think it's because the wind no longer passes through the upper tower's teeth. Bess hasn't written. I think she would have if she found the tree. The chapel soil is firm again. Ralph planted mint and says it grows quickly, but he doesn't taste it anymore. And then something watches from the courtyard. It doesn't move. It waits. The mirror is gone, but I don't think it's silent. Edric read in silence for hours. The pages painted a picture of a woman holding back something no one else saw. She spoke of roots and memory, of the weight of the keep, of dreams that echoed across the floorboards. She never sounded afraid, but she sounded tired. And at the end, one final note, scratched in faded ink. If the earth breathes again, listen. If the wall softens, do not step through unless you're ready. And if you hear my name in the dark, do not answer. Only remember. Edric closed the book and held it in both hands. It trembled faintly, or maybe that was just him. He didn't tell Mistress Anwen. Not yet. He just started walking different paths. Ones Marta once described. And that's when the sounds began. Small at first. A knock in the chimney that didn't match the wind. A creak on the stairs long after everyone else had gone to sleep. And once, the scent of mint in the northern wing, where no herbs had grown for decades. He began writing too. Small notes on loose parchment, kept in his own drawer. Second bell rang once at dawn, then fell silent. No sign of wind. A leaf near the well turned white overnight. Not frost. Soft like paper. The cellar steps sound hollow. I counted. 13 steps yesterday. 14 today. It didn't feel like haunting. Not exactly. It felt like being nudged. Like a door gently pressing open. One afternoon, Edric followed a draft into a room he didn't know existed. It sat behind the old scribe's quarters, no longer in use, where the mortar had flaked and ivy crept in through the cracks. There was a hatch in the floor. He thought it was storage, but it opened easily, and beneath it, stairs. He lit a taper and descended. The air grew colder with every step, but not damp. Not moldy like cellars usually are. It was dry, old, heavy. At the bottom was a chamber, octagonal, lined with stone niches. In the center, a circle of slate, marked with faint, curved lines that looked almost like roots. He knelt, touched one line, and the cold pulsed upward through his fingers. He staggered back. The light wavered, and then he heard it. A whisper. "Don't wake what remembers." He ran, didn't stop until he reached the kitchens. He stood near the hearth until his hands stopped shaking. But he didn't stop going back. The next night, he returned, sat in silence beside the circle, waited. Nothing happened. The night after that, he brought Marta's journal, read aloud to the empty room, page by page. His voice echoed strangely in the chamber, as if someone else were reading along in a slower voice. Then, on the seventh night, the slate circle changed, only slightly. A crack that wasn't there before. Thin, curved like the line of a root. He touched it. No cold this time. Just a word in his mind. Remember. He finally told Mistress Anwen on the 10th day. He expected disbelief. Or scolding. Or at least a long silence. But she just sighed. "You found the room. You knew. I was told never to open it," she said. "The steward before me called it the deep vault. Said it was sealed by Marta and meant to stay that way. But we don't seal things because they're evil, Edric. Sometimes we seal them because we're not ready." Edric watched her carefully. "Are we ready now?" Anwen didn't answer. Just handed him a key. Not like her usual ring of brass and iron. This one was carved from wood. Smooth, pale, warm to the touch. "Marta left this in her desk," she said. "No one ever figured out what it opened." Edric stared at it, then nodded. That night, he went back to the deep vault. The crack had widened. The slate circle felt softer, like worn leather. He placed the key in the center. Nothing happened. He left it there and waited. 3 nights later, the dreams began. He dreamed of fog, of hands pressed against glass, of a woman's voice, distant and calm, whispering things he couldn't remember when he woke. Then came the smell. Not rot, not smoke. Mint, sharp and green and ancient. It filled the halls for 1 hour every night, just after the bells struck midnight. Then it vanished. No one else seemed to notice. And still the slate cracked. Day by day. Tiny shifts. Not enough to draw attention. But Edric knew. Something was waking. And it wasn't angry. It was hungry. For memory. For name. For story. He didn't tell anyone else yet. Not Ruin the scribe, who asked why he looked tired. Not Tally, the gatekeeper's daughter, who followed him now and then and asked too many questions. He didn't want to spread fear. He just wanted to understand. He returned to the journal. Found Marta's oldest entries. One passage stood out. "I once asked the woman in white what she missed most. She said the sound of leaves. They never rustle the same after you've been forgotten." And Edric realized something. This wasn't about ghosts. This was about roots. What had grown, what had been buried, and what was beginning to rise again. The wood key was still there, resting at the center of the cracked slate. Edric sat cross-legged near it, his taper barely flickering in the dry stillness of the deep vault. It had been 8 nights since the first dream and 13 since he'd opened Marta's journal. He no longer expected answers. He just waited every evening in silence. The silence, however, had changed. It no longer felt empty. It felt expectant. Sometimes he could hear a faint sound like water dripping, though the air was bone dry. Sometimes he thought he saw something in the corner of his eye, a shimmer like heat on stone, though the vault was cold as ever. He had stopped telling Mistress Anwen everything. Not because he didn't trust her, but because he didn't want her to stop him. He felt like a door had opened just a little, and if he stepped too far back, it might shut again for good. One morning after a long, restless night, Edric took the journal to the rookery tower. No one else went up there anymore. The birds were gone, long replaced by riders and sealed letters. But the view was clear. From a narrow window, he could see the forest's edge where the tree had once stood. He wondered what Bess had found, or if she had ever come back. In one of Marta's later entries, she mentioned Bess only once. "She was braver than I ever was. She walked into the roots without a mirror. If she found the tree, I hope it was still listening." Edric closed the book. He didn't understand everything yet. Not the tree, not the slate, not the strange, shifting number of steps between the kitchens and the vault, which now changed every 3rd day. But he had begun to feel them all connecting, like vines that had grown apart and were slowly curling back together. That night, he brought a bell. A small one. Plain iron. Nothing special. But he remembered Marta's notes about sound. He placed the bell on the cracked slate and struck it once. The tone rang sharp and clear. And then something answered. Not a voice. Not quite. But a low, distant chime echoed back from below the vault. As though another space lay beneath the slate, deeper than the castle's foundations. Edric stayed still. The air thinned. His skin prickled. Then he heard the whisper again. Not yet. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he reread the journal twice. There were entries he'd skimmed before, ones that now glowed with new meaning. The glass remembers, even when shattered. Especially then. I sealed it not to trap it, but to hold the question still. It was never about keeping something in. It was about keeping it from being misunderstood. And if anyone opens this again, I hope they listen before they look. Edric began writing his own notes next to Marta's, carefully penciled in the margins. He didn't think of it as altering her words, more like speaking back across the years, like answering a letter left open. In the days that followed, others began to notice small changes. Tally, the gatekeeper's daughter, mentioned that her shadow no longer matched her footsteps when she crossed the northern corridor. Ruin, the scribe, claimed he heard quills scratching in the night when the hall was empty. And Anwen, stoic, solid Anwen, told Edric quietly over bread and tea that she'd found moss growing in her ink pot. "We don't keep any moss," she said. "There's none in the gardens. Haven't been for years." And she looked at him hard. "You've been back in that room?" Edric nodded. "And it's not dangerous," he said, "but it's the wake." Anwen didn't flinch. "Marta feared that." "No," he said. She respected it. "That's not the same." Anwen stared at the fire for a long time, then said softly, "Don't go any deeper until you're sure what you're standing on." That night, Edric dreamed again. But this time, he saw her. Not clearly, more a shape in the fog. But he knew it was Marta. She stood near a tree with bark like ash and leaves that shimmered like glass. Her hands were outstretched, and beneath her feet, roots twisted into words. He woke with the word hollow in his mouth, and a headache that felt like something had been pulled from behind his eyes. When he returned to the vault, the wooden key was gone. In its place was a mark, a spiral, burned faintly into the stone. Not blackened, not charred, more like a memory pressed into the surface. He touched it, and the floor shifted, not crumbled, not collapsed, but turned slowly like a wheel. The slate circle moved one full rotation, and when it stopped, there was a gap, a narrow line of dark between two stones. A doorway. Edric didn't go through. Not yet. Instead, he left. He needed to speak to someone who might remember Marta, not just through whispers, but truly. He'd heard once that one of the old stable hands had served under her. An old man named Corwin, long retired but still kept in the village just down the hill. Edric walked there just before dusk. The road was quiet, the trees unusually still. No birds. He found Corwin sitting near a small fire, whittling something unidentifiable. "Thought you'd be by," Corwin said before Edric could speak. "You've got that look." "What look?" "The one she had. Like you're trying to hold onto something the world's already let go of." "Edric, Saturday, you knew her better than most. Worse than some. She trusted me to keep the horses calm during the winter of echoes." "The what?" Corwin grunted. Not many remember that name now. Wasn't an earthquake. Wasn't war. But the stones shook like bones in fever. And she said not to fear it. Said the castle was dreaming. Said some memories run so deep they rattle the ground. Edric hesitated. "Do you know about the vault?" Corwin's knife paused. "If you've opened that, you need to choose." "Choose what? To learn, or to close it again and live a simple life. You can't do both. It doesn't let you." Edric didn't answer. Corwin nodded, almost sadly. "You'll go back." That night, Edric stood at the edge of the doorway. The air beyond was not musty or foul. It smelled like rain on stone, like dust and mint. He stepped through. The passage was narrow, sloped downward, cut into the rock. No lanterns, no torches. But as he walked, small veins in the walls glowed faintly green, like moss fed by memory. He walked for what felt like hours. At last, the corridor opened into a round chamber. In the center stood a pedestal. On it, a mirror, Cracked, not shattered, just one long fracture across its face. It was not a mirror of silver or glass. It was darker, smoky. He didn't see his reflection. He saw a forest, dead quiet. Then he heard a voice, not Marta's, not his own. Do you know what you've inherited? He reached out, but before his fingers touched the glass, it pulsed once, and the lights went out. The dark was not total. A soft green flicker still clung to the veins in the walls, pulsing like a memory stirred. Edric stood perfectly still, breathing as quietly as he could, though he was sure no one else was near. He did not try to run. He didn't even step back. Something about the air told him that motion would only stir whatever had awakened deeper. Instead, he closed his eyes and waited. The silence wasn't empty. Beneath it, like threads pulled taut, was something quieter still. A hum, not from stone or wind or any voice. More like the sound of thinking. The mirror was still in front of him. Though he hadn't touched it, the space around it now felt warmer, like it had just exhaled. When he opened his eyes again, he expected the forest to still be visible in the glass. But it was gone. In its place was a reflection, not of the chamber or himself, but of a corridor. Familiar, yet wrong. The same slate floors, the same high narrow arches of the vault, but no dust, no cobwebs, as though it were the vault as it once was long ago. Then he saw the figure. She moved across the corridor with the lightness of someone used to silence. Edric recognized her shape before her face. It was Marta, not in dreams, not in memory, but here, in this strange mirror, walking the vault with a small satchel clutched tight to her chest. He watched her stop before the place where the cracked slate would one day lie. She knelt, and from the satchel, she took the same wooden key. Only in her hands, it was still whole. She placed it gently on the floor, looked around, and then said something. Edric couldn't hear it. The mirror had no sound. But the way her mouth moved, it was clear. Let it sleep. She stood, turned, and looked directly at him. And for the briefest moment, he felt as though she could see him too. Then the mirror flickered and went dark. He didn't breathe again until the pulse in the walls steadied. Edric stepped back. He should have felt afraid. But he didn't. Not exactly. What he felt was a kind of heavy, quiet purpose, like he'd opened a door not meant for everyone, and now had the chance to walk through it. Not because he was special, but because someone else had left the door open. He left the chamber without speaking. The mirror stayed behind, its smoky surface dull now, like glass that had wept and dried. Back above ground, the castle had changed again. Nothing anyone could name aloud. No walls had moved. No sounds cried in the halls. But people walked a little slower. Doors stuck that hadn't before. Certain corners were colder than the weather allowed for. And whispers had returned. Not from people. From stone. It was Ruin who noticed first. "My quills keep writing crooked," he told Edric one morning as they shared tea in the scriptorium. "It's like the table's off balance. But I've checked. It's flat." "It's not the table," Edric said. Ruin looked up. "It's the castle. It's remembering things." Slowly. Like someone waking from a long nap. Ruin squinted. "That's not how naps work." Edric gave a tired smile. "Then maybe it's not a nap. Maybe it's a kind of forgetting that starts to undo itself." Ruin sighed. "I liked it better when things stayed in their places." So did Edric once. But not anymore. He no longer believed the castle was haunted. Not in the way children whisper about ghosts. He believed something older had simply been hidden too long, and the act of hiding it had left scars. Now those scars were softening. Reopening, maybe. Not to hurt, but to be seen. A few days later, Edric returned to the vault to make rubbings of the spiral mark where the wooden key had once been. As he pressed the parchment to the stone, he noticed something strange. The burn mark had deepened. Not darker, but deeper. Like the spiral had begun to bore into the stone itself, curling downward, not outward. He remembered Marta's words. It was never about keeping something in. That night, he asked Anwen again. Did Marta ever speak of the mirror? Anwen didn't answer right away. They were walking along the battlements, checking the shutters. It was cool out, but not cold. The kind of weather that made voices carry. She wrote about it, surely. Edric pressed. She wrote about many things, Anwen said. That doesn't mean she understood all of them. But you know something? Anwen stopped walking. I know she never stopped listening, even when everyone else started talking over her. To what? The rooms. The stone. The way certain windows never held frost, even in dead winter. The way some parts of the castle never stayed empty, even when no one entered. Edric looked at her. You heard them too? No. Anwen's eyes stayed on the horizon. But I believed her. They walked in silence after that. Later, back in the old storeroom, Edric read one of the older entries in Marta's journal aloud. When the wall speaks in heat, and the tree grows through memory, then the turning begins. Not in fire, not in ash, but in silence, where truth has no shape. He didn't understand it, but something in his chest did. The next day, the birds returned. Not many, just a few. One robin on the edge of the courtyard, a sparrow near the north tower. But they hadn't come in years. And that evening, he found something placed neatly on his desk, a shard of smoky glass. It wasn't there that morning. No one else had entered his quarters. He held it to the light. For a second, he saw a tree, then a face. Not Marta's. Someone else. Someone waiting. The next time Edric returned to the underground chamber, he brought the shard with him. The mirror remained unlit, cold, but as he approached, the shard in his pocket grew warm. He placed it against the mirror's edge. Nothing happened. Then he whispered what Marta had once written. Let's sleep. The mirror flared. Not bright, more like a reflection catching sudden light. And in it, he saw himself. But not now. Not today. He was older, tired, standing in the same room, but the mirror was whole. The spiral had filled the floor. And behind him, others waited. Faces he hadn't met yet. One of them held Marta's journal. He blinked. The vision faded. In its place, the mirror showed the tree again. Only now its roots writhed, moving, alive, like it was waking up. Edric stumbled back, the shard falling from his hand. But it didn't hit the floor. It hung in the air, spinning, slowly turning, as though caught in water. And then, for the first time, a voice from the mirror spoke. Not Marta, not the strange shape, but something deeper. Memory is a forest. You only get lost if you try to take it with you. Then the shard dropped. Edric caught it before it broke. He didn't return to the mirror for several days. Instead, he copied the spiral onto parchment, along with every phrase he could remember from the mirror, the dreams, and the journal. He started sketching the tree from memory. Then one night, he added something he hadn't meant to. His own name, etched faintly beside the spiral, almost unconsciously. When he saw it, he didn't erase it. He just added another line. Caretaker. He still didn't understand what Marta had done, or what she'd sealed, or called, or released. But he understood what she'd become. Not a gatekeeper. Not a guardian. Something simpler and older. Someone who listened. Someone who didn't turn away. As spring stretched over the land, the castle felt less heavy. Still strange. Still changing. But no longer brittle. Tally stopped hearing her footsteps echo. Ruin said the ink in his quills no longer bent. Even Anwen smiled more than once. But Edric knew the stillness wouldn't last. Whatever the spiral had begun, it was still turning. One afternoon, while walking the castle walls, he found a boy sitting quietly near the west parapet. The child looked no older than 10, with soot-dark hair and bright green eyes. I'm lost, the boy said. Edric knelt. Where are you meant to be? I don't know, the boy said. I follow the roots. What roots? The boy pointed toward the sky, and only then did Edric notice it. Above the keep, far higher than any tree should grow, a single branch had begun to stretch, thin, delicate, and silvered with frost. Not bark, not leaf, but glass, like memory grown wild. Edric stood, and understood at last. The tree hadn't died. It had moved. The dark was not total. A soft green flicker still clung to the veins in the walls, pulsing like a memory stirred. Edric stood perfectly still, breathing as quietly as he could, though he was sure no one else was near. He did not try to run. He didn't even step back. Something about the air told him that motion would only stir whatever had awakened deeper. Instead, he closed his eyes and waited. The silence wasn't empty. Beneath it, like threads pulled taut, was something quieter still. A hum, not from stone or wind or any voice, more like the sound of thinking. The mirror was still in front of him. Though he hadn't touched it, the space around it now felt warmer, like it had just exhaled. When he opened his eyes again, he expected the forest to still be visible in the glass. But it was gone. In its place was a reflection, not of the chamber or himself, but of a corridor. Familiar, yet wrong. The same slate floors, the same high narrow arches of the vault, but no dust, no cobwebs, as though it were the vault as it once was, long ago. Then he saw the figure. She moved across the corridor with the lightness of someone used to silence. Edric recognized her shape before her face. It was Marta, not in dreams, not in memory, but here in this strange mirror, walking the vault with a small satchel clutched tight to her chest. He watched her stop before the place where the cracked slate would one day lie. She knelt, and from the satchel, she took the same wooden key. Only in her hands, it was still whole. She placed it gently on the floor, looked around, and then said something. Edric couldn't hear it. The mirror had no sound, but the way her mouth moved, it was clear. Let's sleep. She stood, turned, and looked directly at him. And for the briefest moment, he felt as though she could see him too. Then the mirror flickered and went dark. He didn't breathe again until the pulse in the walls steadied. Edric stepped back. He should have felt afraid, but he didn't. Not exactly. What he felt was a kind of heavy, quiet purpose, like he'd opened a door not meant for everyone and now had the chance to walk through it. Not because he was special, but because someone else had left the door open. He left the chamber without speaking. The mirror stayed behind, its smoky surface dull now, like glass that had wept and dried. Back above ground, the castle had changed again. Nothing anyone could name aloud. No walls had moved. No sounds cried in the halls. But people walked a little slower. Doors stuck that hadn't before. Certain corners were colder than the weather allowed for. And whispers had returned. Not from people. From stone. It was Ruin who noticed first. "My quills keep writing crooked," he told Edric one morning as they shared tea in the scriptorium. "It's like the table's off balance. But I've checked. It's flat." "It's not the table," Edric said. Ruin looked up. "It's the castle. It's remembering things. Slowly, like someone waking from a long nap." Ruin squinted. "That's not how naps work." Edric gave a tired smile. "Then maybe it's not a nap. Maybe it's a kind of forgetting that starts to undo itself." Ruin sighed. "I liked it better when things stayed in their places." So did Edric once. But not anymore. He no longer believed the castle was haunted. Not in the way children whisper about ghosts. He believed something older had simply been hidden too long, and the act of hiding it had left scars. Now those scars were softening. Reopening, maybe, not to hurt, but to be seen. A few days later, Edric returned to the vault to make rubbings of the spiral mark where the wooden key had once been. As he pressed the parchment to the stone, he noticed something strange. The burn mark had deepened. Not darker, but deeper. Like the spiral had begun to bore into the stone itself, curling downward, not outward. He remembered Marta's words. It was never about keeping something in. That night, he asked Anwen again. Did Marta ever speak of the mirror? Anwen didn't answer right away. They were walking along the battlements, checking the shutters. It was cool out, but not cold. The kind of weather that made voices carry. She wrote about it, surely, Edric pressed. She wrote about many things, Anwen said. That doesn't mean she understood all of them. But you know something? Anwen stopped walking. I know she never stopped listening, even when everyone else started talking over her. To what? The rooms. The stone. The way certain windows never held frost, even in dead winter. The way some parts of the castle never stayed empty, even when no one entered. Edric looked at her. You heard them too? No. Anwen's eyes stayed on the horizon. But I believed her. They walked in silence after that. Later, back in the old storeroom, Edric read one of the older entries in Marta's journal aloud. When the wall speaks in heat, and the tree grows through memory, then the turning begins. Not in fire, not in ash, but in silence, where truth has no shape. He didn't understand it, but something in his chest did. The next day, the birds returned. Not many, just a few. One robin on the edge of the courtyard, a sparrow near the north tower. But they hadn't come in years. And that evening, he found something placed neatly on his desk, a shard of smoky glass. It wasn't there that morning. No one else had entered his quarters. He held it to the light. For a second, he saw a tree, then a face. Not Marta's. Someone else. Someone waiting. The next time Edric returned to the underground chamber, he brought the shard with him. The mirror remained unlit. Cold. But as he approached, the shard in his pocket grew warm. He placed it against the mirror's edge. Nothing happened. Then he whispered what Marta had once written. "Let's sleep." The mirror flared. Not bright. More like a reflection catching sudden light. And in it he saw himself. But not now. Not today. He was older. Tired. Standing in the same room, but the mirror was whole. The spiral had filled the floor. And behind him, others waited. Faces he hadn't met yet. One of them held Marta's journal. He blinked. The vision faded. In its place, the mirror showed the tree again. Only now its roots writhed, moving, alive, like it was waking up. Edric stumbled back, the shard falling from his hand. But it didn't hit the floor. It hung in the air, spinning, slowly turning, as though caught in water. And then, for the first time, a voice from the mirror spoke. Not Marta, not the strange shape, but something deeper. Memory is a forest. You only get lost if you try to take it with you. Then the shard dropped. Edric caught it before it broke. He didn't return to the mirror for several days. Instead, he copied the spiral onto parchment, along with every phrase he could remember from the mirror, the dreams, and the journal. He started sketching the tree from memory. Then one night, he added something he hadn't meant to. His own name, etched faintly beside the spiral, almost unconsciously. When he saw it, he didn't erase it. He just added another line. Caretaker. He still didn't understand what Marta had done, or what she'd sealed, or called, or released. But he understood what she'd become. Not a gatekeeper. Not a guardian. Something simpler and older. Someone who listened. Someone who didn't turn away. As spring stretched over the land, the castle felt less heavy. Still strange. Still changing. But no longer brittle. Tally stopped hearing her footsteps echo. Ruin said the ink in his quills no longer bent. Even Anwen smiled more than once. But Edric knew the stillness wouldn't last. Whatever the spiral had begun, it was still turning. One afternoon, while walking the castle walls, he found a boy sitting quietly near the west parapet. The child looked no older than 10, with soot-dark hair and bright green eyes. "I'm lost," the boy said. Edric knelt. "Where are you meant to be?" "I don't know," the boy said. "I followed the roots." "What roots?" The boy pointed toward the sky, and only then did Edric notice it. Above the keep, far higher than any tree should grow, a single branch had begun to stretch, thin, delicate, and silvered with frost. Not bark, not leaf, but glass, like memory grown wild. Edric stood, and understood at last. The tree hadn't died. It had moved. The strange branch that had risen over the keep never fell. By the time summer reached its fullest, the branch had grown no longer, but it had thickened. Not like wood or ivy, but in the quiet, deliberate way stone grows weathered. People whispered about it from the village below. Some said it had always been there. Others claimed they dreamed of it before it came. But no one touched it. Not even Edric. He kept the boy close. The one with soot-black hair and green eyes. They called him Tomlin, though he never confirmed if that was his name. He ate well, helped in the kitchens when asked, and always listened, really listened when the walls spoke. Because the castle still whispered. Even more now. But the voice had changed. Softer. Less urgent. Like a grandmother finally allowed to speak in full. Sometimes it said names. Sometimes it hummed. Sometimes it just sighed. Edric spent his days recording everything. Changes in temperature in the vault, the pattern of vines on the outer wall, the time between each tremble of the mirror below. The spiral on the floor no longer deepened, but it pulsed with a warmth that didn't fade, even when snow brushed its edges come autumn. The journal Marta left behind was now full. Edric had filled the last pages with his own notes, daily records, but also questions. He wrote to her as if she might answer, not as a ghost or some kind of spirit, but like a teacher he hadn't yet met. "What made you stay?" He wrote once. "What made you believe it mattered?" He never heard her voice, never saw her again in the mirror. But sometimes, the journal's binding felt warm when he carried it through certain corridors. Like someone had just set it down moments before. Anwen had grown slower on her feet, but her eyes were just as sharp. She never doubted Edric's reports, nor the symbols he copied from the mirror's edge. In fact, she began writing again, her own record in her own voice. "You won't be the last," she said one day, patting his shoulder. "And the next ones might like to hear a few things in plain language." By the time the frost returned, the castle had begun to settle again. Not into silence, but into rhythm. Rooms opened on their own in the morning, then closed gently at night. The doors stopped sticking. Quills sat straight in their inkpots. And then one night, the boy, Tomlin, stood by Edric's bedside, holding the shard of mirror. "It's ready," he said. Edric didn't ask how he knew. He simply rose, wrapped himself in his cloak, and followed the boy down the stairs. The path through the vault was clear. No echo this time. No throb of buried heat. The chamber stood still, like a breath held just before sleep. The mirror glowed faintly, soft like candlelight. Tomlin stepped back. Edric walked forward. And this time, the mirror did not show trees, or corridors, or faces from the past. It showed him, but not alone. He stood beside someone else, someone older, their hand on the spiral. A child sat nearby, drawing the symbol on parchment. A new journal lay open between them. The castle behind them was whole. The branch over the keep was gone, and the vault glowed not with memory, but with light. Edric felt something rise in his chest. Not dread, not joy, peace. He stepped back, and the mirror dimmed. No pulse followed, no tremor in the stone, just quiet. Edric turned to Tomlin. "You saw it too?" The boy nodded. "It's time to close it." Edric frowned. "Close it." The door. The wound. The story. Edric swallowed. "Ow!" But the boy was already walking to the center of the chamber. He knelt at the spiral and took from his cloak something no one had seen in years. The wooden key. Whole again. He placed it in the center of the spiral. And waited. The stone didn't shake. The mirror didn't flare. But the light in the walls began to fade, like a flame calmly being lowered. And with it, the mirror began to dull, until it was no longer glass, but stone again. Seamless, smooth, untouched. The spiral cooled, and the chamber let out one long, low breath. When it was done, the boy turned to Edric. "Now I can sleep," he said, and left. He wasn't seen again. Edric searched the castle, the woods, the village. No sign, no trail. Only a note left on his desk, in handwriting that wasn't quite child's, but wasn't quite grown either. "Don't keep trying to make it speak. Just listen. It will answer when it needs to." And that's what Edric did. He stayed. He tended the stone, walked the halls, spoke little, listened much. And though no new mirrors appeared, and no fresh spirals burned the floor, the castle never forgot him. Years passed. The village below prospered. The birds stayed. And one spring morning, a girl from the kitchens stumbled upon a sealed door near the old scriptorium. She pushed it open. Inside, she found a journal. Half full, still warm. She opened it and began to read.